Hey guys, welcome to another video. Today we're going to be talking about data storytelling. We're going to be talking about how to effectively present your work and your projects to the stakeholders that you work with. A little bit about me. I'm a senior data scientist and I've been working in this industry for about 5 years, and it's varied from anything from consulting to entertainment at Disney today. And I can tell you on a weekly, monthly basis, I am constantly working with and presenting to stakeholders. Now, look, I know this is not as exciting or sexy as something like a recommendation engine or machine learning model, but I promise you, this is far more important. I always tell this to people who are kind of getting started. When I was in that position, I thought the biggest obstacle I was going to face was something like building a machine learning model, tuning the model, feature engineering, but I promise you the biggest thing I deal with on a monthly basis is my ability to present my work to the stakeholders. Now, the way it works in industry is if you can't really sell your work, you can either lose the faith in your leadership and their faith in data science, and also you could just not get any of your projects greenlit, which means you work on all this stuff and then nothing happens, which can be quite demoralizing. I hope that kind of shows why this is so important, because if you could do this well, you have more likelihood of your work and your efforts really getting pushed to the next level. I always say this, what separates a good and a great data scientist is, of course, the statistical concepts and their ability to code, but also their ability to communicate and sell. And that's really why I want to put this video together, is show the framework I use. Now, before I hop into that framework, obviously, I want to get a couple things out of the way. Take a look at the description. I put together a mock example slideshow that you could use as a framework for any presentation you're putting together. Like I said, copy it, definitely take a look. Let me know what you think, if you thought it was helpful. Like I said, I want to create as many resources as possible that you guys can use. And also, there's a bunch of other content there. My blog, LinkedIn, feel free to reach out. I try to make myself as accessible as possible. And lastly, if you like this video and you like the content I've been putting out, definitely like it. And also, please subscribe. I'm just getting this off the ground, so your initial support is absolutely invaluable. Now, with that spiel out of the way, let's actually hop into the framework. So a framework is really a 4-step process, which you can see right here. Step 1 is usually identifying the problem statement and the scale of the problem. Step 2 is debatable, but I really like putting the performance metrics front and center right earlier on in the presentation, so I usually do that next. Step 3 is adding the technical details, and that's where I really show the approach and kind of how it kind of works under the hood. And then lastly, I kind of tie it all together and highlight what are the next step, how can we take what we've done up until now and really kind of scale it to anyone who would potentially use it. Like I said, it seems pretty straightforward, but if you keep it simple and touch upon these points, you're giving your stakeholders and those decision makers all of the content that they need to make a decision in the room or immediately after. And that's really the goal of this meeting. Rather than just kind of laying out in detail what these 4 steps are, I actually wanted to put together a mock example that's quite practical and show you how I would actually apply this framework to that example. So the example here is what I'm going to call a transaction forecasting model. And all that really is a classification model that predicts whether a customer is going to buy something in the next month or not. So it's binary, right? And ideally, in my hypothesis is this type of solution can then be used by marketing to effectively target specific customers, right? Because if a customer is likely to purchase, we should definitely send them emails or something like that, right? That's kind of it at a high level, and it's not perfect, but it'll help kind of get the point across when I go through each of those 4 steps. With that out of the way, let's hop into point 1, which is problem statement and scale of the problem. Okay, so here's kind of a slide that I would typically put together. I mean, the aesthetic can be updated, but the content is really what's important. The problem statement is, right now, marketing doesn't have an effective way to target customers that may or may not purchase. It's kind of arbitrary right now, which results in not an optimal ROI, right? That's the problem statement. The scale of the problem is, we've noticed our ROI is 30% less than the industry average, which is causing us to burn more than $3 million a year based off of ineffective marketing spend, which, a quick aside, that is so critical, and do your best to look at your data and come up with similar examples like this. If you could take what you're trying to accomplish and put a dollar value on the problem at hand, it'll catch everyone's attention like that, and you're more likely to actually get buy-in, because if there's multi-million dollars at stake and your your solution addresses that, people are going to get on board, right? So that's why I always put that section in my kind of problem statement slide. And then so the last part of it is the solution. So what I would say is, based off of all of these attributes, we can build a machine learning model that predicts whether or not someone is going to purchase next month or not. And we can use those predictions to start guiding our kind of marketing strategies and figure out who we should be talking to, who we should be not. And pretty straightforward, but what's really important about the slide is right away I've explained what I'm trying to do, how I'm going to do it, and why it's important that we do this, because we're spending so much money on things that aren't quite effective, right? So that's the first step. Reel them in, get them excited, help them understand the problem at hand. Now moving into step 2, which is model results and evaluation metrics, right? This is up for debate, but I really like putting this up front and center, because I want them to immediately think, okay, you had this really good idea, and oh wow, you built something that actually worked and that is predictive, etc., right? And it's really important because there's just natural skepticism of data science in large organizations and big Fortune 500 companies. So when you're dealing with that skepticism, it's important to kind of squash that as earlier on in the meeting, so that they don't have that kind of thought lingering throughout a majority of this talk, right? And that's really important. It's really important to the psychology of this meeting you're having with these kind of quote unquote big wigs. So here you see kind of the slide that I might put together, right? And it's very minimalistic, and that's very intentional. I just want to show, here are the metrics, here are the results, and if possible, I would put like an industry standard for a similar use case that I can use to compare. If you don't have that, that's fine. But if you do, it's just a bonus, because immediately these guys can say, oh wow, like you're doing like 20% better than the industry. That's really great. So if you have that, great. One thing I will mention right before I move on to the next section, you could pick so many different evaluation metrics here, right? This is a classification model. So rather than using precision and recall, I could have easily used something like F1 score and F2 score, which I probably would have back end, right, when I'm optimizing the model. But do I really want to spend time in this meeting essentially like trying to explain what a harmonic mean of precision and recall is? That's just definitely going to derail this conversation and really get me nowhere in terms of greenlighting my project. This brings me to the biggest rule of thumb that I use when I put together these type of slides, and that's cater the technical details and the technical granularity to the least technical person that's on your attendee list. This is a really foolproof way to make sure everyone is feeling engaged and comfortable with the content that you're putting forth. A huge asterisk, and I think you might be thinking the same thing, and that's, you can't dilute it so much where it adds no value. So you have to really make a judgment call, make sure what you're putting forth is not too technical, but also really delivers the impact that this slide is supposed to, right? So there's no formula, but use your judgment and make sure you're kind of putting forth the right information in this type of slide. You might ask, what if they don't even know what precision and recall is, right? And that is fair, and that's why I usually keep a 10 to 15 second explanation of what the metric is, just to show them, okay, I know what I'm talking about, this is what it is, and move on, right? That's really how quickly you want to kind of address that sort of question if someone asks what that metric even means, right? In this case, I could say something like, oh, precision is, of all the times we predict someone's gonna purchase next month, we're typically 90% correct. And the recall is, of all the people that have or are going to purchase next month, we capture about 95% of those. And I would leave it at that. Immediately that addresses and gives them a tangible example that they can process, and allows you to go to the next section and continue to move forward, right? The less friction throughout this presentation, the better the better impact it'll have in the long run. Now hopping into step 3, which is where we start really diving into technical details and how everything actually works. Now, this can be a pretty risky section because if you make things way too technical or just add too much content there, you could easily cause their eyes to glaze over and just bore them in this meeting, which is never great, right? Like, you want to maintain a pretty high level of engagement throughout the entire meeting, or else it's not going to really go over that well. So with that in mind, I kind of put together this like slogan that I've used throughout my career that has really helped me out, and that's make things technical enough where people realize they needed a data scientist to do this, but not so technical where their eyes just glaze over and they get bored, right? It's this real sweet spot that showcases the interesting nuances of a model, but also keeps it high level enough where anyone could process it. Here's an example kind of how I might lay that out. You see in the left side, I've kind of highlighted all of kind of the inputs into the model, but I kept it general enough, like categories rather than the specific attributes. I also highlight that there's 150 different attributes that are being considered in this model. That's a really kind of impactful statement that it's important to highlight in a slide like this. Show that we've considered a wide range of attributes and user kind of details in order to make these predictions. All of these inputs get flowed in and inputted into this machine learning model, which in this case, I'm using XGBoost to essentially output the results that we want. And because you're not going into that much detail, what I usually say is something like, for the sake of this meeting, I'm going to keep it at this level, but if you or anyone in your team is interested in diving a little deeper into the methodology, we could definitely have kind of a spin-off meeting or a separate meeting focus on that. I think that helps you keep going and pushing this like conversation forward without spending too much time on the methodology. Now the last portion of this is pretty straightforward, and this is where you kind of highlight what are we going to do with all of these intelligence in this model, right? And it's really important, and the one piece of advice I would always give is make sure whatever you're showing in this type of section is a relatable example that can help them grasp how things will actually work at scale, right? That's the one thing I'd probably emphasize. Now, hopping into the fourth and final step, and quickly before we do that, let's recap what we've presented up until now. You've showcased what the problem is and the scale of the problem. You've highlighted that your model performs really well and is predictive. Then you've highlighted the blood, sweat, and tears and the amount of intelligence and thought that went into building this solution. Now it's really important and absolutely critical for you to lay out explicit next steps that we as a team would need to take in order to get this model and solution into the hands of everyone who needs it. You've gotten all of these big wigs and influential people in the room that can make the decisions. Make sure you're putting forth decisions for them to make. And I would do it something like this, right? And very simple, you can go so many different ways with this, but really what I like to highlight is what the action item is, who do we need to get that action item completed, and what is the anticipated kind of ETA or ETC for that to be completed, right? A quick note, when you're putting together this tentative schedule, make sure you add a bit of a buffer, right? Make sure it's a little conservative, but also talk to the people you're going to be working with so that they have buy-in on the schedule. Do not blindside someone and say that they're going to give you something in 3 weeks when they don't even know about it, right? So like I said, this is pretty straightforward, but it's absolutely critical. Make sure there's such an explicit decision for these guys to make, because you'll end up getting the most out of the meeting. And that's essentially it. You've seen this framework, this 4-step framework in action on that fake example. You've seen that if you do follow this framework, you're giving anyone who's interested or involved all the information they would need to make the decision, right? And that is really critical. And if you do that effectively, you're making your chances and giving yourself the best chance to push forward any project that you're working on, right? And that's what all we're trying to accomplish, right? Sometimes it might not work, but you need to give yourself the best shot to push forward anything you're working on, right? And I hope this helps you in your day-to-day. I hope you are able to use this framework and push forward any project that you're working on. If you do, let me know. I would love to hear it. And with that, I think that closes this video. And If you did like this content, if you found some of these resources useful, make sure you like and subscribe. I keep saying it over and over again, I'm kind of like a parrot, but your support early on, your support in general is just so invaluable. So definitely subscribe and let me know what you think. I'll see you guys in the next video.